The Cerebral Entertainment Podcast.
And go. Hey everybody, welcome back to yet another riveting edition of the Cerebral Entertainment Podcast. I am James, and with me as always is my good friend Colt.
Are you trying to figure out if you should look there or look at me? Because I'm confused now.
Yeah.
This is a different setup than normal.
Yeah, I'm just looking around.
Okay.
Just trying to scope the entire area. No, I feel like now that I've got the video in front of me, I've got to focus on the camera more. I'm also going to focus on you. I'm going to split my time between the viewer and the
Or
co-host.
should we just stare at the camera at each other in there, so we're still looking at each other, but also the viewer at the same time?
You ever do that though? Like you're driving a car and you're in the driver's seat and you're looking at the mirror, the rearview mirror at the people who are in the back seat, and you talk to them. You ever do that?
Yeah.
Or you ever look, like, say there's a mirror on the wall there and there's someone in the mirror. So instead of looking right at them, you talk to them in the mirror. Do you find it awkward at all?
The mirror thing, like in your house, no, but it does it's really awkward in the car for me. Like if there's people in my back seat, I would rather just not have my rearview mirror. Because you always even if you're like trying to look out the back window, you look up there and you've got eyes at you. And you're like, and you think they think you're a creeper because you're like looking at them when you're really not.
They expose you as a creeper,
right?
But you almost always lock eye contact. Somehow you catch that eye contact when you're trying to even back up and that person's just looking at you. It's like, why are you looking at me right now? I need to use this mirror. You do not. So who's the creeper now?
Look at your phone like normal. Jeez. Be a normal person.
I've just noticed that, like in a room, if there was a mirror right there, or we can use this for example, the monitor. If I'm talking to you through there, talking to that Colt, sometimes it's awkward for me. I'm like, now the person is right here. Why am I looking at that person in the mirror?
It wouldn't be as awkward if we are both looking at each other there. But if you're looking there and I'm looking here, then it's odd.
Yeah, you're right. That does.
You're looking at my ear.
That does increase the level of awkwardness there. Yeah, I'd have to
Uh-huh.
agree with that. But at any rate, man, it's good to be here this morning. How are you? Talk to me about what's going on with you. Catch me up with the current affairs of the Bricados.
How am I?
Yeah.
Sore.
Okay.
I am on a 5-day off from work. Is that considered a vacation? Is 5 days considered a vacation?
I would say
Even
so.
if you're not doing anything for a vacation besides moving houses?
No, I think it should count.
Okay.
It's a work vacation. It's not like a vacation where you're actually necessarily having fun. But some vacations are just productive. It sounds like this is a productive vacation for you.
So would you say there's 3 kinds of vacations? There's like an actual vacation where you go somewhere. There's a staycation where you just stay at your house and don't really do much. You just relax. And then there's productive vacation.
I think that's fair.
Okay. So this is a productive vacation.
Okay, good.
So I'm in a scenario where I'm selling my house. My parents are selling us their house. But before we can move our stuff from our house into their house that we're buying, we have to move their stuff out. So right now it's basically, we have a trailer and we move their stuff to a storage shed. We come pick up stuff from our house and then take it back to their house. And it's just like a vicious cycle over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's sucky.
It's a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
And moving is always a pain just because there are so many different things that happen, so many different variables that you have to consider. A lot of times your stuff gets messed up in the process, or maybe you ding a wall, or you've got to take a door off to get something to fit in a room, or it's just always something. It's never just, hey, let's take this stuff and move it from this place to the other place, and then we'll be done.
And you never realize how much stuff you actually have until you go to move.
Absolutely.
And you know how like you have things when you live somewhere and you don't think you're going anywhere, but you never use them. They just sit in a closet. And then when you go to move, you're like, oh, give that to Goodwill or something like that. And it's like, you just hung on to that in your closet for 4 years. Didn't touch it, didn't even think about it, but you had to have it. At some point you had to keep that. And now you're just going to give it to somebody random.
Yeah.
You're going to give it to somebody to sell to somebody. That's
Right.
kind of odd, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could sell it yourself. It's kind of always a good idea to have a garage sale of some kind before the moving process begins, maybe.
Yeah, but that takes a lot more work
It does.
and effort.
It does. You know, sometimes it's definitely just easier just to give it away,
Right.
even if someone else is in fact going to sell it. So, but it's a good time when you're moving to do just that, though, to kind of thin your belongings out a bit so that you know, so you don't have to move it for one thing. And you have this moment of clarity where you see that thing that's been in your closet for 4 years and you're like, you know what? I haven't touched this thing in 4 years. I'm moving. I don't want to move it with me. I don't want it to sit in my new closet. So I'm just going to get rid of it. And
Right.
I think it's, you know, this is an opportunity for you, Colt. It's an opportunity to thin your possessions to a more realistic level that can be more manageable, hopefully, for you and the wife. And you're still going to fill your house up with other things that will sit there for years and years in a
Right.
closet.
And the bad thing is this is like going to be forever home territory. So this is going to be, if you bring something into the house and it goes in a closet, it's hard telling when it's not going to be that closet again.
Right.
Like it's probably going to be there forever or until we die.
Well, yeah, whichever happens first, forever or until you die. No, but it's kind of like you want to flatten the curve, okay?
Okay.
Almost like COVID. So
this should be neat. Where are you going? Go ahead.
Yeah, it sounded good in my mind. It's gonna sound terrible, but you want to make sure you flatten the amount of benign possessions that you have in your new place. And so you get rid of the benign possessions you have at your old place so that you don't fill up your new place with those benign possessions, because you know you're going to compile more possessions that will in fact be not used or useless or both. And so you just want to flatten the level before you even get started. Because if you take your old junk and add it to the house, and then you're going to add new junk, because you know that's going to happen. It happens to everyone.
Right.
You know, we put our foot down, we say, nope, not this time. This is my forever home. I'm not going to, oh yeah, it's happening. It's coming. So you just want to flatten the curve and not add more junk to your projected junk.
Okay, so I have to question the word benign.
Okay.
You used it like 3 times. And I get it, but what does benign actually mean? Is it just mean like not needed? Or does it mean, I thought it meant like non-cancerous.
Well, it's not significant, I think is, and I'm going to look it up.
I would appreciate it if you did. It's going to annoy me the entire show if you don't.
I want a good, I want a good definition. I don't want to just say.
You like my Daffy Duck mug?
I do. That's nice. And maybe I'm using this out of, I don't think so though. It seems like, and maybe I've been using this word wrong all this time. And because this says of a mild type or character that does not threaten health or life. Okay, I can see that. And that's why it's benign, like tumor.
Uh-huh.
And you also have having no significant effect. There it is.
Okay,
There it is.
I like it.
Because I said significant. So see, I knew that I was onto something. It also says of a gentle disposition or showing kindness and gentleness. And so the way that I was using it, it is having no significant effect or harmless.
So if I'm considered being benign, I'm being gentle.
I guess so, yeah. But
I'm not going to use that word.
So trying to put it back into the sentence, I guess useless would have been a better word than benign, but it's having no significant effect in your life, right?
Okay.
And so the possessions that you had that I said were benign are things that obviously not like your Daffy Duck mug, which is significant in your life.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
It plays an important role.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that thing's going in the closet for 4 years not being used, because it's a great mug.
And
right?
It holds coffee, which is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's the, but the opposite of benign in a tumor is malignant, which means cancerous. But that's not a malignant mug, right? So
hashtag malignant mug.
Right. I'm not sure what that would look like. But at any rate, moving's hard. And speaking of, malignant tumors, there's been a lot of news lately about assisted suicide. I think that it's something that I haven't really thought about or heard about in a long time. I remember, I don't know if you do, I guess you don't because you were asking about him earlier. When Jack Kevorkian was fresh in the news, I remember that being a thing, and of course I was a younger person at that point in time, and I couldn't really grasp the full effect of what assisted suicide really meant, and I'm surprised by the more recent news that it's still, I guess, it has a stigma. It still has a debate. There's still people on both sides of that debate that are pretty passionate about what they believe in. And so I guess I'll just ask you, what do you think about assisted suicide? Is that something that you feel like should be should it be legal? And B, what do you think about the ethics and the morality of assisted suicide for both the patient and the prescriber?
Prescriber seems like mindset would be the biggest thing when it comes to that. I think like I'm taking all of the laws and the politics and all that kind of stuff out of it. Just the mindset you would have to just be like, I am helping somebody. They feel like I am helping them. I am helping somebody versus I'm killing somebody.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I don't know that I've thought about it, like what my ethics are towards it. On one hand, if you are terminally ill and you feel like that's your only option to get away from the pain and things like that, I'm like, well, it's your choice. But then on the other hand, you're kind of probably not in your right state of mind when you are in that state, and it can cloud your own judgment toward yourself and things like that too. But I don't know which side I lean more towards, to be honest with you.
So what you mentioned there at the last was basically consent.
Yeah.
Do you have the capacity to truly consent to something like that when you're in a great amount of pain and suffering, and even the mental turmoil that happens when you become terminally ill? It may very well cloud your judgment. That's definitely a good point. So a lot of people would probably enact an advance directive, which is basically just an end of life directive. It's kind of like a will. This is what I want done with me. Like, for instance, if I'm in a car wreck and I go into a coma and I'm on life support, and the doctors indicate that there's no way that I'm ever going to breathe on my own again, or I'm ever going to wake up, that advance directive says pull the plug, right? And in a way, it's not the same as assisted suicide because it's actually taking the assistance away from life. But in a way, it kind of parallels with that, because you are taking an action that is ending someone's time here on this earth.
Right.
And so I would imagine that people would put that in their advance directives. Now, there's a couple of other components here in my mind. A, whether or not you believe in God and afterlife. That's going to weigh on your morality and the ethics involved. So if you don't, then that takes away the stigma from thinking that, because most religions, at least that I know of, it looks very poorly on suicide, right? Like you're not supposed to do that. That will send you to a bad place. So that's definitely going to weigh in. But if you don't believe in that, then you're simply, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just like killing anything, and that's suffering. If your pet gets run over, oftentimes where we come from out here in the country, your dog gets run over and it's suffering, you help it out by shooting it in the head, ending its life pretty quickly.
Right.
I've never done that. I've never been able to. I've always had to have someone else help me with that, because I couldn't bring myself to actually do it. I could never be the doctor prescribing any kind of assisted suicide help. I think a lot of times they do it by medication, not all the time, like by an actual pills, a bottle of pills. And so it's something that, I guess, eases you out and no pain, and you just kind of pass on. I don't think I could do that, even though it's a non-violent way of assisting someone to cross over into death, knowing that I'm the one that's doing that. I probably couldn't do it, but that still doesn't necessarily exactly mirror my thoughts on assisted suicide.
Okay.
You know,
So what are your actual thoughts on assisted suicide?
well, it's hard for me to really determine. I would be so afraid if I were terminally ill, and this would be my luck, that as soon as I got some assistance and went ahead and suicided myself, it'd be like the next day or the next week at tops, they found a cure. And I just was just that, I jumped the gun just a little too much.
But then again, which I mean, I guess age. I guess when I think about this, I think about somebody older that's terminally ill, and I shouldn't, because anybody could be in this position.
Could be anybody.
Yeah, I can see where conflict would come in.
Yeah, and I don't know. That would be probably one of my biggest things, and not even though if I was suffering, and the suffering was so great that I couldn't be coherent or I couldn't reach out to my loved ones or anything like that, then obviously that would definitely play a role, but as long as it doesn't matter, as long as there's time left, as long as you do still have breath in your body and your lungs, and you're at least somewhat cognizant to be able to see your family, especially if you have kids or just your family in general, then it seems to me like I would want to spend every last second that I have here doing just that and not killing myself any sooner than what I already am going to die, because I do want that time with them.
So, and this might sound terrible, but do you think there's people out there who feel like after a certain point that they are a burden on their family and others, mm-hmm. and does that play a factor in these are medical bills that are racking up for somebody that's laying in a hospital bed who, and if you don't believe that you're going to get any better, and doctors are telling you you're not going to get any better, we're just making you comfortable, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
What's the, what do you do?
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely the case with a lot of people, and not just the financial burden, but the burden of care. If someone's not able to feed themselves or change themselves, bathe themselves, they become incontinent, there's just all these different things that the caregiver now has to tend to. And yeah, that could, and it does all the time. I remember when my dad got sick, he checked out. He was diagnosed, and then 5 weeks later he was gone. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. And those 5 weeks, it was life altering for him, because the decline was pretty quick, but I could see him not wanting to be a burden, but the burden that he perceived, we were all happy to take care of him, but the burden that he perceived became greater and greater because his decline happened so quickly, and he needed more and more care until the very end.
So, okay, so don't take this question the wrong way, but do you think that it was easier for him to let it all go because of the way he lived his life, and his position being a preacher and stuff, mm-hmm. and just having the mindset and knowing in his mind exactly what was going to happen once he passed? Do you think it was easier for him to accept everything a lot faster than it might for a lot of people?
Probably.
Think so?
Yeah, probably. Although he did worry a lot as he was dying about leaving us behind.
Yeah.
Because he was very much the patriarchal, which I know that's kind of a hot button word nowadays, but he was a patriarch in a good way. He was definitely the head of not just like our immediate household growing up, and then with the grandkids and everything. He was like a figurehead in the community, obviously, with the church and just the community at large. And so he was worried about leaving everybody behind, because so many people depended on him. He was there for so many different people. But otherwise, yeah, I do think that him letting go and slipping, and because it seemed like at some point in time, he just kind of, like I said, checked out. Mm-hmm. And so once he did, the last couple of weeks, he would barely even open his eyes, and he wouldn't respond much. And so as that was happening, I think he literally just kind of, his mind went somewhere else. And possibly the cancer had spread to his brain too. We don't know, but it seemed like he was making his peace and was already kind of going. Like death oftentimes is a process, unless you die violently or immediately of a heart attack or something like that. Death is kind of a slow process. It's more of a drift from what I can tell, from what I've seen with people, especially him, because he was the closest one that I watched go. But it's like a drift into, whether or not you believe there's something else, or just a drift into darkness. It's a passing away of this life onto something else.
Right.
And that's what he experienced. And so I bring that up in the first place because it makes me think about other people, and a lot of people don't have the same perspective of going to a better place when they pass on. And so if they're going through that same suffering and they're trying to hold on to life, because that's what people do. It's our very nature to survive and to hold on to life until our very last breath. And so that's just what we, how we're built and how our minds work. But for someone who's going through that suffering, because it's not just the pain suffering, there's a lot of mental turmoil too, a lot of anxiety. I wasn't used to seeing my father anxious because he just wasn't that kind of guy. He worried some, but he was never like an anxious person. And he became anxious closer to the end of his life because of the perspective of looking at death in the face, basically, and that drifting happening, and it's coming, right? And for the days that you have left, that you're dying, like actively, literally. And the kind of mental turmoil that causes, it's hard to discount that now that I've seen it. So people going through that, it's not just because we talked about consent earlier and state of mind. It's not just that they are physically dying; they're mentally going through, this extremely anxiety-provoking, change that a lot of people probably have a lot of trouble handling. I can imagine. That's why a lot of people toward the end of their life get certain medications to try to help, just relieve anxiety.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned Kevorkian earlier, and you said that I didn't know much about it. I don't. The only reason not the only reason I know that name, but the main reason I know that name is because for some reason, small things stick in my head, my brain from when I was younger about, like, if something happens or somebody says something that I didn't understand at a certain point, for some reason, it will stick with me until I figure out what they were talking about, if that makes any sense. So, like, there was an episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where, I don't know if it was not Dr. Phil, Uncle Phil, or somebody like that was in the hospital, and their doctor had a name that was close to Kevorkian, and that was the joke. It was that everybody was like, "Are you what?" Like, they were freaking out that their doctor was related or whatever. So, and I didn't understand it because I was young and I had no idea who this Dr. Kevorkian guy was. So yeah, it's one of those things that just sticks in my head. But still, so he actually did prison time, and that's one of those things that's crazy to me. And I understand that it was a different time, and people's thought processes have changed over all the way to the highest of highs of people in this country, in the world. Thought processes have changed and mindsets have changed and stuff like that. Laws are being enacted that counteract stuff that they didn't believe in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, So it's interesting to me that now they're going to put into place something like assisted suicide in Hawaii. We said it was that they've implemented it now.
I believe so, but there are several states where it is already legal.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's not really that new of a thing. As a matter of fact.
Okay, I didn't know it was actually legal in place. But regardless, it's it's one of those things that's interesting to me, where somebody did a lot of prison time for something that now he could do legally.
Right. That's happening with other things as well. I mean, even with the marijuana,
right?
There are people still incarcerated for charges against them regarding marijuana, and now several states have it even available for recreational purposes.
Right.
And just about everybody has it for medical purposes now. So the same with the assisted suicide. I don't know how you mitigate that, how you mitigate the effects of making something legal after it was illegal for so long, and someone, in fact, loses 8 years of their life.
Right.
And how do you make up for that? Or do you just consider it like, this is us moving forward, this is us making this change for society as a greater, for the greater good of society itself? But the fact is, when they committed the quote unquote crime, it was in fact illegal.
Right.
And so they're still paying for doing something that was against the law at that time.
Right.
Still difficult though. But I was looking for the states. I don't. There were several. I think Oregon has had legal assisted suicide since like '97.
Holy cow! Really?
Something like that. It's maybe it was 2004. I saw a lot of dates and now I can't find it again. I don't want to spend too much time looking. But yeah, there are, like, I think Washington D.C., Oregon, Hawaii now, maybe Colorado, but several of the states have legally assisted suicide. And so another difference here, here's another kind of a contrast, is that you've got legally assisted suicide, which is done with, a certain prescription medication that I would imagine eases suffering, and it probably eases anxiety, and it's probably like a slow drift too. I would just imagine. I doubt it's something that just eats your stomach out, from the inside out and causes you a lot of pain. They wouldn't do that. Okay, so you've got that versus someone, say, taking a gun to their head, or jumping off a building, or hanging. The latter of those two is a lot more violent. It's a lot. I would assume it's anxiety provoking, especially if you jump off a building right before you hit the ground. Can you imagine what's going on in your mind? So
I guess for most people, it's like, if you have a loved one that's terminally ill in the hospital, even though they get to a point to where they think that maybe it's done, maybe it's over, let's go ahead and cut the cord. People might, if somebody's still alive, there's still a chance,
mm-hmm.
kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And especially if it's a loved one, if it's somebody in your family, it's, I don't know. I've never been through this, so I don't know, but what we talked about so far, I can imagine how hard it would actually have to be already be in the situation that's happening. You have a loved one that's terminally ill, but now that loved one, wants to just end it all.
Right.
Could, if it was going to happen on their own, could it happen the next day? Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know what I mean? Like, but they're still alive. So right now I'm looking at it like there's still a chance that you're going to make it through this. Unless maybe they are older, which I said, but that's kind of what's been sticking in my mind, is like an older person. But I don't know. It can be anybody.
I think, I don't have the source to back it up right now, which is typical for me when I'm actually in a conversation like this. But I think that most of assisted suicides are, in fact, the patients are older people.
Okay.
Because younger people still have more drive to survive, still have a different perspective on trying to beat this thing, trying to recover, whatever the case may be. Older folks, I remember my grandfather, he was alive till he was 93 years old. But I remember when he was in his later 80s, he would just talk to me about how he was just so tired, and he was still relatively healthy at that point in time. He really didn't suffer at all until closer to the end of his life. But he just mentioned how tired he was. And he said, all the people that he loved before, minus his wife and his sons and of course his grandkids. But the more generations there are, the to an extent, the more removed you are from the actual connection. So in other words, he lost his parents a long time ago. All of his brothers and sisters were already gone. All the people that he knew coming up, the people that supported him, the people that took care of him, the people that were his role models and his just everybody that reinforced him as a person, especially a younger person coming up, they had been gone for a long time. And aside from that, he has had all kinds of experiences. He's been around the country, and I don't know if he ever went around the world or not, but he did a lot of stuff. He did a lot of travel, a lot of fishing, a lot of cooking fish, a lot of church. He just did a lot of all those things. And at some point in time, it seems like for people that are older, more advanced in their years, they have this sense that they've lived life and it's okay.
Right.
You know, it's okay to die. And younger people typically don't have that because we have our whole lives ahead of us. And I'm using us, you know, I'm still putting myself in that category, but we still have so much of our life ahead of us that we're more willing to fight and more willing to push and press and wait and try to survive to the very last breath. To whereas an older person, they're like, yeah, you know, I think I'm done. I think this is okay. You know, I got this terminal disease. I didn't want it this way. I wasn't ready to go yet, but I have had a good life. So let's call Jack Kevorkian and let's get this thing over with.
Right.
I think they're more likely to do that.
Right.
And you know, that's okay. It shows a difference in the life, the developmental different developmental stages of a person.
Right.
And I don't remember them off the top of my head once again, but there's a lot of different stages, and one of the main goals, and this kind of bleeds into Buddhist philosophy a little bit, but one of the main goals of that philosophy is to avoid suffering. And to avoid suffering, you don't get attached to things. Basically, you learn how to let go of the things that you, as humans, that we normally attach to. And so learning how to let go of that is really a way to become very stoic in the way that you perceive life. You know, I love my laptop, right? I love it, but what would happen if something happened to it and it broke and I had to let it go? Would I be okay? Well, obviously with a laptop, I'm going to be, because I can replace it. But what about a family member?
Right.
Or what about even, you know, money, my house, my car, my truck? What if I lost it? What would that do to me? Would I be able to avoid that sense of attachment to the point that it's not going to cause me suffering, right? And obviously, for anybody who's not a sociopath, our attachment to people is probably the most difficult. It should be the most difficult of the things to detach from or to not grow that strong attachment to. And so when you lose people, you are going to suffer. And the same can be said for your own life, I think. If you could detach from that and you know that you are on your way out, and if you can do that and remain unattached to a degree and stoic about that, then at least your body might be dying, but you won't go through the same mental turmoil that you would otherwise because you are so attached to the life that you have.
Right.
So
that's something that's pretty rough to not be attached to, though.
Yeah. 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 That's why you see Buddhists out in a cave or something, doing a mantra and meditating, detaching from things.
Right.
Which you don't really see that, but that is kind of part of the Buddhist philosophy. And Stoicism is a thing all of its own too. Stoics date back to, Marcus Aurelius and before him, I'm sure I'm missing probably to the Greek philosophers. I think there was a Greek philosopher. I don't remember the name, but even in the Roman emperors would practice Stoicism. At least Marcus Aurelius was a big one on that. And there are methods to use. There's a way that you can practice Stoicism, and you can sit around and basically what you're doing is, and I actually use this in practice some with clients, but you're diffusing the emotional impact of things like death or like terminal illness. And so the way that you do that is you practice in your mind. You kind of consider the worst possible case scenario. And I've always done this to some degree naturally. I consider the worst possible case scenario, and that's what I expect.
Yeah.
So that way, the only surprise I could possibly get would be a good one. You're not going to catch me off guard because I've already expected the worst.
Do you think that's the best way to look at things?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think it has its utility. I think it has some benefit, especially if your primary objective is to minimize the impact of, the emotional impact of anything like that. Because you can do anything. You can practice in your mind. You can mentally practice losing a loved one just to see what it does to you.
But doesn't that kind of, I've thought about this before, but it kind of, if you go too deep into that, it can screw you in like a lot of other areas if you have, because it kind of lowers your expectations on other things in life too.
Yeah, and I also think that when you do that, of course, you don't have to stay in that mode more than just for the sake of practice, but you're not being mindfully present in the moment either, and so it kind of goes against that particular mindset, and it takes away some of the enjoyment of what's right in front of you,
Right.
because you're so worried about manipulating the potential impact of whatever it is that you're trying to diffuse. But when you're doing that, there's something right in front of you that you're not actually enjoying. So let's just say that you are mentally preparing yourself to lose a loved one, and so you just you think about it, you practice it in your mind, what you're going to do, how you're going to respond, and the whole time that person is still there, and you're missing those moments, because being a stoic is kind of being like blah,
Right.
to an extent.
Right.
There's no high highs, but there's no low lows. You just kind of stay right in the middle. But honestly, as human beings, we're meant to have high highs and low lows, as long as you don't suffer from something like bipolar disorder where it's extreme.
Right.
But I mean, it's still, and to some degree, it's still good to try not to get too high and too low. You want to keep things within a good balance. But we're supposed to experience different levels of emotion. It's part of life, and it's there for a reason.
Well, you're just trying to learn over time. Like, I want to look at the end result and think about what I think the end result's going to be in whatever situation, whatever scenario you're in, but also don't shy too far away from what's actually happening in front of you. Because even if you think it's going to be a bad end result, you could probably change that if you are in the moment and focus on what's going on right now. You can change it maybe and make it a little better, but I was just thinking about, even if you dumb it down to, like, if I'm on vacation for 5 days, like we talked about earlier, if I'm on actual vacation for 5 days, but I'm thinking that this is going to go by so fast and I'm going to be back to work in 6 days, I'm not going to be really paying attention and be in the moment with the 5 days that I'm on vacation and should be having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about what's going to happen after this and how fast it's going to come.
Right.
And I'm bad about that sometimes. I really am.
Yeah. I've been that way too. It's like you get on vacation and you just count the days, and that in and of itself causes some suffering, because you're not really focusing on the vacation. You're focusing on the future, the end of it, the dread that you're going to have because everything's over with.
Like they always say, like, Sunday's the most stressful day, because that you're kind of gathering your thoughts and getting ready for work, back to work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Friday, you're like, heck yeah, I'm off work. I got a full weekend, 2 days off, and we're gonna rock it. And then you get that one day off, and then now you're back to Sunday, and you're thinking about what's gonna happen on Monday at work.
Right.
So it's like you're losing, and I don't know. It's a good thing to be mentally prepared about what's going to be happening, but I think maybe you have to learn, like, several different outcomes, or think in your mind, things could go this way or things could go this way, but you have to be able to accept either way that it's going to go, so it doesn't give you anxiety and make you so anxious.
Mm-hmm. I like the term acceptance there. I think acceptance is a big key. And oftentimes, though, as stoic as you may be, and as much foresight as one may have, like back to death, for instance, you never really know how the death of someone is going to affect you until it does. You have an idea, you think so, but you never really know for sure until it happens. Once it happens and it sinks in and it's real, the impact is real, then that's when everything kind of comes to fruition, and you start to experience the emotions and the thoughts and the behaviors and everything that is wrapped up into being a human, suffering the loss of someone that was close to you. You can never really prepare yourself 100% for sure. So you always have to be adaptable to some degree, or else you start to experience dysfunction and disorders might set in. And so those could be short-term or long-term. But I think it's still, once again, it is somewhat helpful to be somewhat mentally prepared. I mean, because it sucks when you get caught off guard. I've also had some family members who died suddenly. I had an uncle who died in a car wreck 15 years ago or so. And because of the suddenness of it, when that happened, there was no time to prepare, say goodbye. All you had was the moment when it happened. And so there was no time to think ahead. There was no time to mentally prepare ourselves for the turmoil and the loss. And so either way, you kind of have to be adaptable. But acceptance is something that is actually part of the grieving process, the stages of grief. And once you come to acceptance, that's when you're really starting to able to let go. You're able to start letting go of the suffering that is caused by your attachment to that person. And so that's, once again, kind of where Buddhist philosophy comes in pretty handy when it comes to that stuff, although I don't practice letting go all the time.
Right.
You know, I just, especially for some things like your children and your spouse or your significant other, whatever the case may be. You don't want to sit around and practice letting them go all the time. I don't. I think that's part of their philosophy. That's why monks don't get married and they shave their heads.
Yeah.
Because they practice letting go of their hair as well as everything else.
Actually, I didn't know that. Is that's an actual thing?
No.
Oh, you made that up. Okay.
I did.
That's pretty good right on the spot.
Well, I thought it was kind of funny myself, but it obviously didn't land because you were right there with me thinking that I knew what I was talking about. No, I was just rambling.
No, I think all in all, I think the biggest thing is, like, especially when it comes to the suddenness and, things you don't expect, just accepting again, knowing that anything can happen at any point.
Yeah. And
especially when it comes to those, like your loved ones and those that are close to you, making sure that you're not like whenever you leave somebody, make sure that everything's even keel and you're on good terms.
Yeah.
Like I would never want like me and you to get in an argument right now and then one of us leaves and then we never see each other again because there's a car wreck or something like that,
Right.
And because then you're going to be living with mental turmoil, knowing what happened before that, or the last words that were said to each other was, whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that and I think it's for everybody, but I think it's the older that I get, the more I realize how important that kind of stuff is. And I haven't really seen much death in my life, but it just, the older I get, the more I understand how important it is to keep the people close to you close, and kind of let the rest of the stuff go. If you're going to have anxiety or be anxious about anything, let it be about the people that are closest to you, because you can fix that pretty easily. Don't worry about the extended people who don't really make that big of an impact on your life in general.
Yeah.
Because then you're hurting yourself. And I think it's a term, I've seen it on Facebook 100 times, but it's like, if you're thinking about somebody else, you're basically letting them have free rent in your brain. And it's kind of true, because they probably don't have the same mental turmoil about you. You're letting them think about it, but it's not easy to do, man. Your brain thinks about things whether you want to think about them or not. And I think that happens the older I get too. I never had this stuff 10, 15 years ago. Now there's stuff that like I don't really want to think about, but it just is recurring, and you just have to learn how to sort it all out and move on, I guess, right?
I think so. I think redirecting your thoughts, because if you just let your mind go to its own devices, it goes all over the place. That's what, once again, I've read a couple books. One of them was called, it was a Buddhist philosophy book, and it was called Taming the Monkey Mind.
Yeah.
And I've read that phrase in different iterations on several different occasions in several different sources. But, the mind is like a monkey. It's just, going all over the place and climbing walls and throwing feces and, whatever the case may be. It's wild and it's erratic and it needs to be tamed. And I think that's where we can self-redirect, our thoughts, our minds, in order to make sure that it's useful and productive and not erratic, and not focusing on the things that don't really matter. In essence, what you're saying is don't sweat the small stuff.
Right.
And what you're saying, don't sweat those who really don't matter that much. Like if there's a person at work you're not really close to and they're just annoying and you're spending too much time thinking about how annoying they are, you could be using that time thinking about how much you love your spouse or your mom and dad or whomever. Instead, you're giving that power to that person who you don't even really care for.
Right.
And so I agree with that. But also, don't sweat the small stuff. Like you were saying earlier, it's kind of like don't go to bed angry.
Yeah.
Never go to bed angry. Never leave the house angry, because something could happen and you don't see each other again. And whoever's the one left will experience the mental turmoil of that last moment or whatever the case, circumstance, for the rest of their lives, and it's going to cause a lot of suffering for that person. And so also don't sweat the small stuff with the people that you love. You know, you're going to have arguments, you're going to have disagreements, fights, people are going to annoy you, they're going to piss you off, whatever. It's always a good idea to try to rectify whatever's causing that gap just as soon as possible, because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
And having that foresight, I think, is definitely something good to have, because it does keep you in the present moment, as long as you're focusing on what you can do right now to make things better, you know, from moment to moment as the moments go on, which they inevitably do.
They do keep on going, don't they?
They do. So at any rate, we're at a good time here where we could continue to rant and go on, but that might carry us over. We are getting ready to speak with Dr. Rob Kelly.
I'm excited.
An addiction specialist. And so he's going to educate us here in just a little bit about addiction and all things related to addiction and how people can find help. So I'm looking forward to that conversation.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to cut it off now, and I bid you adieu until like 20 minutes from now when we start talking again.
Right.
So yeah.
All right.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. And we are out.